Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, a series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a distinguished essayist and autobiographer. His work is a testament to the human spirit. He's written more than 23 books in 43 years of writing. His work has a quality of vivid, graphic detail. He portraits both contemporary India and is a roving journalist who reports on his travels around the world. I'm delighted to welcome Ved Mehta. Mr. Mehta, you have written extensively about India, and you have also described yourself in some contexts as a homeless intellectual, that you feel intellectually homeless.
Right.
In what ways do you feel intellectually homeless?
Well, when I was 13, India was partitioned and we lost everything in Pakistan. We came to the Punjab. Then in 1949, 2 years after the partition, I went to the United States for education. And after that, I really lived in the West, mostly in America, but I was also educated in England. So basically, although I speak Hindi and Punjabi and write it, and at one time when I was at a school in Bombay, I was fluent in Marathi. Mm-hmm. My language now is English. But you know, in being part of what I call writing literature of exile, I'm really in tune with the contemporary spirit. Many of our writers today are exiles one way or another. So I think what I mean by homeless is that there is no place I can call my home.
Much of your writings, certainly the earlier writings, were about India and about your life in India. And they were very notable for their visual detail. Was that a form of exploration for yourself, a definition of the reality that you couldn't perhaps visually grasp?
I lost my sight when I was 2 months short of my 4th birthday. And so there is a storehouse of visual memories in my unconscious. And I developed a technique of trying to describe everything as people see things. Because from the very beginning, I did not wish to be an Indian writer or a British writer or an American writer or a New Yorker writer or a blind writer. I simply wanted to be a writer. And I think that I have succeeded in that experiment. It remains an experiment because when you're a writer, if you know, writing is a lifetime apprenticeship. When you're a writer, you never know what you write is really going to survive you or not. But I wrote as a journalist, and a lot of people who read me never knew I was blind. Many of them didn't even know I was an Indian or educated in the West. So I think I've fulfilled my aspiration in that respect.
You've had a long relationship with the New Yorker and are very closely identified with the magazine. What has been so special and unique about that relationship?
Well, I had a relationship with its editor, William Shawn, who had been with the New Yorker for more than 50 years when he retired or was forced out. And I developed a very close relationship with him, as indeed did all the other writers who wrote for the New Yorker. And we were given latitude to write whatever we wanted to. What Shawn succeeded in doing at the New Yorker was to create ideal conditions in which writers could write and artists could draw. And he left you pretty much alone to work out your own salvation. And so if I decided that I wanted to write a big book on, say, India, which I did, I think 250,000 words long, Portrait of India, or if my interest took me into writing a book about Christian theology, which I did, or on Oxford philosophy, or Oxford historians, or indeed biography of Mahatma Gandhi, he mostly left me alone to pursue whatever I was interested in. So basically, I worked alone on the projects that I was interested in, with the confidence that if I wrote something that was of some value, there was someone out there in the world who could appreciate it, not for its commercial value, but for its literary value.
It has been some time since you wrote The Portrait of India, your in a biography of Mahatma Gandhi. You have continued to sort of stay in touch with India. How do you respond to the new emerging India?
Well, India has come a very long way since I left home in 1949, but it has a long way to go. I think that the middle class is expanding. There are a lot of wonderful activities going on in India. It's very thrilling. On the other hand, we have not made great progress in alleviating poverty for the mass of people. And I'm really appalled when I look at the world that probably between the time Jesus Christ walked on this planet, at that time they were from about 11 million to 100 million people. It took us 1900 years, that is year 1900, to get to 1 billion people. Now, from 1900 to 2000, we've got to 6.5 billion people. Of course, there are people who say there are vast tracts of land in Australia and in America, and we can tolerate a population of 10 or 12 million, a billion people. But I think that without a terrific effort to control the population, I think we are going to be befouling our own nest. We are going to be destroying the environment, the very environment that sustains life. And I think India exemplifies that problem because now it has almost 1 billion people. How are these people going to be adequately fed and housed and looked after? I think it's a huge problem, and I don't think that we found a political or economic way of dealing with it. Democracy is a good way, but it may be the best government we know, but somehow I think government has failed the country.
You have written extensively in your writings, or a comment as much on the social fabric of India. In what ways have you felt that social fabric change?
Well, I think it's quite clear that many of the barriers thrown up by caste disabilities, by economic prosperity of few people, those barriers have been removed, or in large measure are in the process of being removed, I should say. So there is a certain amount of fermentation in the country, which is heartening. But I think it's one thing to abolish such social disabilities legally, quite another thing to abolish them as psychological barriers, and God knows how long that'll take.
As sort of a writer in exile, as you've described yourself, who's maintained an abiding interest in India, how do you respond to, shall we say, the westernization of India, or the cultural colonization of India?
Well, sometime I wonder whether maybe not India, but some other parts of the third world, or so-called third world, would not have been served better if the colonial rule would have continued, because what we did, I think, in many of these poor countries was to substitute colonial rule by foreigners for colonial rule of our own people. I think that that has been one of the depressing parts of the freedom struggle, that when Gandhi, and Nehru and others first thought of it, they thought that a new dawn, new age would come into being. But I'm enormously depressed that after 50 years of independence, nearly 80% of our people in India have no laboratories. That only, perhaps according to the World Bank, maybe only 60% of the people can be counted as literate. I mean, it is shocking that our own people ruling our own country should not have taken such basic measures as trying to improve the sanitation of common people. I think that the priorities of the country have not been set properly almost from the day of independence, and that's one of the reasons why I ended up writing a book about Mahatma Gandhi.
In that book about Mahatma Gandhi, it was in some senses a controversial book because of your commentary or your reporting on the personal elements of Gandhi's life and how that interfaced with the public face of Gandhi.
Yes, well, I felt when I set out to write the book that I wanted to discover the human Gandhi. I think we have tendency, especially when we don't want to listen to the message of a great person, which Gandhi was, to make him into a symbol, make him into a kind of a public icon, and forget about what his human message was. Now, how many people who give lip service to Mahatma Gandhi remember that he wrote essays about how people should dispose their excrement, that they should carry a spade, that they should dig a ditch and deposit their excrement in it, then put mud over it. I mean, these are the kind of basic things that he fought for, and he lived like that. His ashrams were like that, where people did everything themselves. And so we made Gandhi into a big hero, but we forgot his message. And I think that's happened to all great leaders, happened to Jesus Christ, happened perhaps to Muhammad, maybe to Socrates. And Gandhi was a very great leader, but I think in making him into an icon or giving lip service to him, we actually ignored what his message was. Certainly the country didn't follow it, the government didn't follow it. And what I wanted to do in my book, and I hope I succeeded, was to discover the intensely human Gandhi who lies behind all these myths. So my process, if the book was controversial, it was because I was trying to, in a phrase of a very great theologian, Bultmann, demythologize him. And this process of demythologization has been carried on by theologians for Jesus Christ, and I thought it needed to be done for Gandhi too.
You were also initially somewhat sort of skeptical or critical of Nehru, and then were charmed when you met with him in your conversations with Nehru.
Well, I think he was a very great man, Nehru, and was a great leader, but I think that history will probably judge that he was stuck in the 30s ideas of Fabianism and socialism. And I think, usually history swings like a pendulum. And when Nehru was alive, everybody thought that the only way to make improvements in this country was by social action by the government. But we now discover that government can be as venal as business, that government can actually profess certain public concerns, but actually when it comes down to it, they are no better at delivering than business. In fact, business may be better at delivering some of those goods and services to the people. But the business need to be regulated, because if people are simply allowed, as they are now being done in some Western countries, to go whatever their market forces are telling them, then the poor will go to the wall. No one will be a spokesman for the poor the way Gandhi was the spokesman of the poor. So what one really needs is more private enterprise in India, for sure. But you also need a government, vigilant government, which can regulate the market forces, or actually what you're going to have a society driven only by money. And I think there are many more values in life and in the world than just money.
Who are the contemporary leaders that you have met and interacted with in India?
I haven't been in India for 6 years. I've stopped writing anything about India. I think I did that about 6 years ago. Because I feel that in the old days I used to come to India every year and spend a month or two traveling. I had some sense of the pulse of the country. The last Prime Minister I met in India was Narasimhan Rao, when I was doing a piece about the sanitation problem in India. But I'm totally out of touch with the new leadership. I don't think actually politics and government is as important as many of my Indian friends think. I think sometimes that the government here is rather like a cork bouncing on an ocean. It has no control over the ocean. So it's not important whom I've met, whom I know. That's irrelevant. The question is what kind of economic forces and social forces are at play. And even with those economic and social forces, I no longer feel in touch, because I've lately been very much preoccupied by inner exploration, exploration having to do with psychoanalysis and writing and so on. So I'm not really doing any kind of external writing these days, what might be described as external writing these days.
When you talk about the inner explorations, we in India have always sort of seemed to pride ourselves in our cultural heritage, our traditions, our philosophies. What do you feel are the sort of Indian elements to your consciousness, to your psyche, that you value, that you think you derive from this part of your heritage?
Oh, I think I was very close to my family and my cousins, and I grew up with them. So I think one of the enduring things I took from India was the Punjabi language, the relationship with my parents, my sisters, my brothers. And to me, India is not an abstraction. It's not a country. It's really the India I grew up with, the people I knew as I was growing up. So those are the things, what the values they represented, the value of renunciation, of love, of sacrifice. I mean, these sounds like empty concepts, but those were the values that I experienced, and those are the values that I carry with me.
What about Indian food? It's something that I know sort of several Indians that exiled Indians who I've featured in the program have frequently said that the one thing that they constantly feel a craving for is food.
I know Zubin Mehta,
right.
Mehta is a friend of mine. He carries around bottles of chili powders and puts.
Well, I was referring to him indeed.
Yeah,
yes.
But actually, I have had no interest in Indian food. In fact, I think very little about food. That may have to do with the fact that when I was 2 years short of my 5th birthday, I was shipped off to a Bombay school for the blind, which turned out to be an asylum, where the food was absolutely atrocious. I think a lot of Indians, unfortunately, live to eat. I simply eat to live. So, no, I have very little. I mean, I enjoy a good meal, but I never hanker after Indian meal. In fact, I find that if I'm in India, I love eating Indian meals all the time. But when I'm in the West, I hardly ever enjoy eating an Indian meal, because my system, my digestive system isn't really up to it. So I get sleepy in the afternoon. I like to work long hours. I mean, I have to write maybe eight hours a day. And if I have a heavy dinner or a heavy lunch, I can't work effectively. So I prefer to starve myself so that I can mobilize my spirit, as it were.
You know, from the early training and that you received in terms of being able to work with your sort of being visually challenged, to use the politically correct word, in what ways has technology made a difference to your life and functioning?
I'm afraid in my particular case it hasn't made much difference. Until 5 years ago, I dictated everything to a pencil, and I also, of course, touch type very fast. But the old beat-up Underwood typewriter and pencil were my lifetime companions with an amanuensis. 5 years ago, I was persuaded by one of my amanuenses to dictate to a computer, which now I do. But I use a computer very much the way I used to use typewriter. I don't use it for any other purpose. I'm not onto internet, I'm not onto e-commerce or any of that. Because I think actually most of my writing is done by sound. I dictate it to, and then it's read back to me. In fact, all my books should be read aloud. Of course, this would take a very long time to read them, but I really write with the music of words in mind. So this is not to say that other people in my situation are not enormously helped by technological advances that are going on. It's just that it's very hard to teach, to use a cliche, an old dog, new tricks. And since I developed certain techniques of work when I was 15 and 16, I've not been able to separate myself from those techniques and adapt myself to the burgeoning new technology.
You spoke about the inner exploration. Is that more sort of directed towards a spiritual realm, spiritual seeking?
No, I'm afraid I'm basically an agnostic. I have no interest in, I don't think God, if he exists, gave us enough evidence to believe in him. No, my inner exploration, which I've been carrying on for the last 30 years, is a work which is autobiographical, but I think of it as a sort of cultural exploration. It's set in 3 continents, India, England, and America. And the first book in it was called Dadiji, which was a story of my father's growing up in an Indian village. Then it was followed by Mamaji, which was a story of a woman growing up in a city, in her instance, Lahore, in the 19th and 20th century. And then I carried on with my own life and Arkansas and California and New Yorker. So basically the inner exploration is really, I'm using myself as a kind of a tool to explore the different worlds in which I grew up and how those worlds changed and developed, and also how I changed and developed. So now I've finished the 8th book in the series, which was called Remembering Mr. Sean's New Yorker, The Invisible Art of Editing. That was the 8th, and now I've finished the 9th volume, which is about my romantic life and my psychoanalysis. So I have 1 or 2 more volumes to go, and then I think the enormously challenging work, to use your word, I undertook will be finished. I should say that while I've been writing these books, I've also been doing other books, so it's not as if I've only been working on this series, which I call The Continents of Exile.
When you say working on other books, do you work on books simultaneously?
No, not necessarily. I just mean when I finished Dadiji, I didn't go on and write Mamaji immediately. I wrote a biography of Mahatma Gandhi in the meantime, which took me 5 years, and after I finished Mamaji, I then wrote another book about politics. In other words, it's very hard to keep to one huge project, and it's nice to have certain amount of diversity in one's writing life.
As you had mentioned that you were writing not just as someone coming from an Indian sensibility, you were establishing and have established yourself as a writer per se, and this was long before the recent fashionableness of Indian writing in the West. Have you been in touch with contemporary Indian writing that seems to be reaching out and appealing so much to the West?
Oh, I think that some of the best writing in English being done today is by Indians. Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth was a stunning performance, and I read certain amount to Rushdie, but the other people are coming along, and they are not only writing good fiction, but a lot of very good critical writing. So I think that one of the great gifts of the British Empire may not be the political ideas that they left behind in India, but perhaps the language. We have got one of the most beautiful language at the disposal of people of various nationality, and I think that Indians have enriched English by their writing and by their uses.
You define yourself as a writer. Beyond that, what would you sort of like to describe yourself as being, as seeking, as aspiring to?
I have absolutely no interest in being anything else but just a penny a liner. I don't aspire to any other thing in life that is aside from my private life of being a good father and a good husband, bringing up my children well. I aspire to nothing else but to write well and to write elegantly and beautifully and carefully, because I think words have a magic, and I think actually one of the awful things that's happened in my life is that people are writing about literature as if literature was not magic but was some kind of science. I've always thought that literature is nothing but magic, and I was very lucky that from the time I wrote my first book at the age of 20, I have enjoyed being a magician, playing not with wands and handkerchiefs, but playing with words. So I'd be very glad to be set on my funeral pyre with just the word writer. That's all I want to be, and that's all I am. I'm nothing else.
Mr. Mehta, thank you very much. That's been a great privilege.
13, India was partitioned, and we lost everything in Pakistan. We came to the Punjab. Then in 1949, 2 years after the partition, I went to the United States for education. And after that, I really lived in the West, mostly in America, but I was also educated in England. So basically, although I speak Hindi and Punjabi and write it, and at one time when I was at a school in Bombay, I was fluent in Marathi. My language now is English. But you know, in being part of what I call
Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, a series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a distinguished essayist and autobiographer. His work is a testament to the human spirit. He's written more than 23 books in 43 years of writing. His work has a quality of vivid, graphic detail. He portraits both contemporary India and is a roving journalist who reports on his travels around the world. I'm delighted to welcome Ved Mehta. Mr. Mehta, you have written extensively about India, and you have also described yourself in some contexts as a homeless intellectual, that you feel intellectually homeless.
Right.
In what ways do you feel intellectually homeless?
Well, when I was writing literature of exile, I'm really in tune with the contemporary spirit. Many of our writers today are exiles one way or another. So I think what I mean by homeless is that there is no place I can call my home.
Much of your writing, certainly the earlier writings, were about India and about your life in India. And they were very notable for their visual detail. Was that a form of exploration for yourself, a definition of the reality that you couldn't perhaps visually grasp?
I lost my sight when I was 2 months short of my 4th birthday, And so there is a storehouse of visual memories in my unconscious. And I developed a technique of trying to describe everything as people see things, because from the very beginning I did not wish to be an Indian writer or a British writer or an American writer or a New Yorker writer or a blind writer. I simply wanted to be a writer. And I think that I have I have succeeded in that experiment. It remains an experiment because when you're a writer, if it's writing